Barbecue. Hello and welcome to Boost, Booze, and Barbecue. This is Andy, and I know you guys are expecting a call-in show today because, well, it was all over Facebook. But that is not what we're doing today. Impromptu. I had a chance to talk to somebody that I've been wanting to talk to for quite some time. Tony Barthel over at Curbside.tv. He's got a show called Curbside Classic Car Show Podcast, and they do a lot of fun stuff over there. They have a really good show. I'm actually a huge fan of what they do, and they have a free car show calendar that anybody can submit to and be added on. And it's just a really good community resource. So I really appreciate what he does, and I appreciate what his co-host does. And again, I'm a listener to his show, so I was very excited to have him come on and do this with me. So we'll get right to that. But before that, one more reminder for you guys. This is the last week to be able to submit any reviews or ratings to iTunes or to Facebook, facebook.com/boostboozbbq. And you could win that free t-shirt. We've had some reviews rolling in, so right now it is anybody's game. But I will be choosing at random a winner of that free t-shirt. So make sure you're going out there, leaving us a like, leaving us a review, and throwing us a little rating. Not only do we want to know how we're doing, but we love engaging with you guys, the listeners. So I do appreciate you doing that, and I cannot wait to give that free t-shirt away. And again, next week, top of the episode, we're going to announce the name. They will be able to reach out to me, and we will work out the shipping details. It's all going to be free. I just need an address. So we're going to shout your name out and get that shirt sent right over to you. So thanks for doing that. And without further ado, let's go on over and see what Tony is up to. How's it going, Tony?
Oh, it's fantastic. Good to talk to you.
Good to talk to you. Thank you so much for calling in or allowing me to call you. No, wait, you called me. Yeah, thank you for calling me.
Yeah, the telecommunications gods finally smiled on us.
Yeah, we were kind of doing the runaround. We were trying to do Skype. You could hear me. I couldn't hear you. It's obviously something on my end. It's just, it's a weird thing. I don't know why I wasn't able to hear you, but you know what? No matter. Right. It's like,
here we are.
That's right. And that's another reason why I don't want cars getting too high tech on me, because this is the kind of stuff that happens.
Yeah, it's, for example, a friend of mine had just bought a new Chevy Colorado, and he specifically bought it for towing. And he loved it until he realized every time he made an adjustment to the climate control or the audio system, a display popped up on, or, a message box popped up on his display, and sat there for, moment. But it's annoying when you're looking at the GPS and it's like, yeah, okay, I turned up my radio. Who cares?
It's so true. He bought a Colorado for towing, huh?
Yeah, he's got a smaller travel trailer. So,
is it one of those diesel Colorados?
No, although I know someone who has, he has the GMC Canyon, but he has one of those and loves it. Loves it.
I keep hearing good things, but man, I don't know if I'd be able to spend $45,000 on one.
Yeah, well, I mean, or how about $75,000 for just a regular old pickup truck?
That is true. Oh my goodness. My EcoBoost truck, the smartest thing I ever did was buying last year's model in February when they're trying to get rid of the things, It's not fully loaded, it doesn't have all the bells and whistles. Matter of fact, it's a fleet truck, but I only paid $27,000 for it, $27,800.
Wow.
Yeah, that was $12,000 or $13,000 off of the MSRP of the truck. So I mean, I felt like I did it all right.
There's those new 3-liter diesel Ford pickups that you only can buy if you want it outfitted like a Rolls Royce. And I talked to the fleet manager locally about getting one, and you can get one in the regular, man's version of the pickup truck, but it's a special order.
I see. I gotcha. I'm wondering how the Ranger is going to do. We saw the Ranger at the Portland International Auto Show. I had to say, I actually preferred the interior over the Colorado. I felt like it was a little bit roomier, even though it's only 1.5 inches wider.
Well, that makes a big difference. So
it does. The Colorado has always felt small inside to me, like my shoulder is pressed up right up against the window. And again, we're coming back around to the cost. I don't mean to sound cheap, but the bottom line is, if I'm going to be paying that kind of money for something, if I'm paying the same money for a mid-sized truck as I would a full-size truck, I have to go with the full-sized.
Yeah, I agree, because there's got to be a value proposition in there somewhere.
Exactly. And we've jumped ahead a little bit. The reason why we're getting straight into the car stuff is because Tony has his own podcast called the Curbside Car Show Podcast. And would you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, I have the good fortune to be affiliated with a gentleman, Jim Cherry, who has been an automotive author for many, many years, and just is a fountain of knowledge about old cars, 50s and 60s, particularly when it comes to design. That's his field of study. And we had talked for quite a while about putting together a podcast, and just finally did. And we talk about old cars, mostly the history of cars, certain models and marks and what happened and what went right and what went wrong. And if you love old cars, Jim is just this fountain of trivia and knowledge that always impresses me.
I love that. And it's so interesting listening to your guys' shows. I mean, you always mix it up. You always keep it fresh. And I know we've talked about this before, so I apologize. I am biased, but your episodes where you do a deep dive into the prototypes of certain makers, I love those episodes.
Well, and Jim has actually written a book about automotive prototypes. It was supposed to have been published, and it hasn't yet, but it's written and done. And he has been able to even go to the GM Tech Center and dig in their archives. And we have some very interesting guests coming up. I don't want to spill the beans yet, but some very interesting guests when it comes to automotive prototypes and dream cars and Motorama cars. So if you know that field, you'll probably even guess one of whom we're going to have. So
very cool. You are wetting our whistles over here, buddy.
Yeah, I love it. We love those cars.
I'm with you, man. I'm 100% with you. I've had a hard time. It's been a struggle for me being kind of I'm not younger now, but when I was working in the automotive world, I was considered younger, and I always felt like I got kind of a bad rap from the, hot rod guys and stuff. They never wanted to listen to me at 26, 27 years old, even though I felt like I knew as much as some of those guys did. Obviously not as much as all of them, but being able to tell you, what year small block had the round port versus the square port, or what size motor it was, based on the flange, just stuff like that. And I feel like not a lot of older car guys, and I use older with air quotes. I'm not calling you older, Tony, but a lot of car guys from that era don't expect people my age to really know that much about those cars. But automotive history has always fascinated me, and you guys sprinkle in enough of that stuff where it just really keeps me captivated.
Well, thank you. I'm glad you're enjoying the podcast. One of the things, it's amazing to me when you delve into a subject, and I'm going to pick the history of Packards, which we just did, the Packard Motor Company, and you go and go into places where these aficionados of Packards are and talk to these guys, and they can look at things like the louvers on the hood and tell you what year and what model it is or whatnot. The depth of knowledge some of these people have about these cars is incredible.
Mm-hmm. It's pretty shocking. And when you look at like the rear tail lights, that's something that it's one of the favorite things I have from talking to car guys that grew up in the muscle car era, where they'll look at a car. Let's say they're looking at like a 68 Camaro, and they'll go, "Ooh, is that a 67?" And then they'll wait for it to drive by, and they'll look at the taillights and go, "Oh, nope, that's a 68." Just stuff like that.
Yeah, that was always a cheap way to make a difference from one year to the next too. And so, yeah, some of these people are just amazingly detail oriented and can spot from a distance the difference between one model year and the next, or even a special edition of a car, or they'll look at, for example, there's a friend of mine who's really into older Fords, pre-war Fords, and he can go to a car show and look at a 41 Ford, and the deluxe version apparently is quite collectible, and he can tell you if it's a real deluxe or a fake deluxe.
Wow.
Yeah.
Do you know, is it like the VIN number, or is it just him looking at it?
Oh, he can look at it and tell you.
There's wild.
Certain little things, yeah.
Huh. You know, one of the things you guys talked about that really captivated me and was almost a tearjerker is hearing about how the prototypes and the concept cars were just tossed aside and thrown away, because during that time, that was last year's concept. It doesn't have anything to do with this year. We don't need it. It's just taking up storage. Get rid of it. And it's such a shame to hear about that, but it's always nice to hear when people find those and they try to bring them back from the dead. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, and when you think, you're right, part of the problem, there was a number of components that contributed to those cars going away, one of which was if the cars were built overseas, the manufacturers had the tax incentive to either ship them back overseas or just crush them. And GM had a standing order with one of the local junkyards, essentially, to crush these cars because it became a storage issue, and there was a tax issue and all of that. So it was better for them, because all these were, to them, was a marketing thing, to get people in the showrooms and excited about the cars.
Mm-hmm.
And so once they were done with it, and it became an expense that wasn't worth saving, and so off they went to the crusher, or some of them went overseas. And like that, one of my favorites is the XNR, the Plymouth XNR, which is a little 2-seat car based on the Plymouth Valiant that Virgil Exner designed, and it was a high-performance inline 6-cylinder little sporty car that somehow ended up at the Shah of Iran. He became the owner, and so that car ended up overseas rather than be crushed.
That's interesting.
Yeah, and there's a lot of those stories.
There are. Just recently, as a matter of fact, not super recently, I think it was like 2012, 13, 14, something like that. I remember there were pre-production Dodge Vipers that had made their way out to some high-performance mechanic schools and museums and stuff like that. And Dodge, I'm trying to remember why, but Dodge told everybody, hey, I'm sorry, but those pre-production 90, what was it, Tony, 92 or 93 Dodge Vipers.
Those early Vipers.
Yeah, they had to be crushed because they weren't, I think they weren't street legal. And then there was something about, they just needed them taken out. There was some kind of a larger headache there, and they had to be given back to Dodge, and they had to be crushed. It was kind of heartbreaking to hear, but at the same time, we're all trying to kind of understand where Dodge is coming from, be like, some of these cars, they didn't necessarily have VIN numbers, and they weren't necessarily legal for the road and stuff like that. And so leaving them out there might have been too much of a liability, but it's always a shame to hear about stuff like that.
Yeah, and a lot of it might have to have, I barely remember that, but it may have had to do with emissions as well, and registering the cars. And nowadays, every company is so overshadowed by legal issues where you don't want to put something out there and cause bad PR or a lawsuit. So it may just make more sense. Well, for example, look at the GM EV1, all those electric cars.
Mm-hmm.
It made sense to them to basically just bring them all back and crush them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
With a few exceptions.
Well, yeah. I mean, it reminds me of the Peugeot 2CV, and they designed that, and it was supposed to go into production as a people's car right before World War II. It was actually right before the Nazis invaded France, and they were so passionate about the 2CV that they hid them away. I want to say just like 2010 or 11 or 12, something like that. They recently found a 2CV that had been stashed in the rafters of a home that had at one time been lived in by one of the automotive engineers for Peugeot.
Isn't that amazing? I mean, they didn't want the Nazis to get them for obvious reasons, and so they hid them away. And I remember seeing the pictures, and it was like a second floor or something.
It was.
Where they're pulling this thing out of the wall.
Yeah, they had to take the wall. Did they have to take the roof apart or the wall apart?
Something like that.
Yeah, it was something like that. But, that's the thing that I love about the history of automobiles, because if the Nazis had gotten their hands on that design, and let's be realistic, I mean, that is a pretty good design in comparison to the Volkswagen Beetle. The 2CV has certain aspects that are kind of there-ish, not exactly the same, but pretty close. We may never have gotten the Volkswagen.
True. Oh, yeah. It was, and they were basically competitors at the time when it finally went into production. But the 2CVs that was a remarkable little car, although it's funny looking as heck. But if you ever ride in it, it's just French cars have such a smooth, comfortable ride. And that little thing you think of that car has it's like a 300cc engine or a 400cc, and it's a tiny little engine.
Yeah, I think it's something like 7 horsepower or 9 horsepower.
Right? I think my lawnmower has more horsepower. I'm actually not kidding.
It might. It actually might. What did the original Volkswagen Beetle have? Wasn't it, was it 20 something or 40 something?
Something. Well, what blows my mind are the VW transporters with like 36 horsepower, yet they were 9-passenger vans. I mean, man, and of course the brakes on those things, the original brakes it's like making a request at a radio station. Oh, sure, you may call in your request, but good luck if you're actually going to hear it.
Exactly. Oh, that's super funny. I don't know what it is about the Bug, the reason why it was so ubiquitous with, I don't know, the Bug is it's a weird one. I do think that the Bug engine proves the genius that was Ferdinand Porsche, because you look at that motor and you can take that thing from being 35 or 40 horsepower, whatever it is, and you can take it up into the 300s. You can make 200 horsepower on one of those naturally aspirated. It's just such a weird way to look at it. Like, what other engine can you tinker around with? Yeah, you've got to do some work to it, but I mean, it's not going to be. What's the term I'm looking for here?
Yeah, you can modify it to the point where it'll knock your socks off. And I guess you could argue that essentially the Bug and the Ford Model T were sort of aimed at the same target audience. You have to be able to be in the country and with duct tape, chewing gum, and baling wire be able to practically rebuild the thing. Because there wasn't there's not a Napa Auto Parts in every corner of the world in those days. And so they're simple, basic, reliable cars. And the Bug just nailed it. And yeah, you're right. You can make those things absolutely screamers in performance. But, part of, I think, what sold the Bug in the 50s is they came over here. And of course, Americans were not all that fond of Germans, because the whole World War II thing, but they established this criteria of service at the dealerships where when you went in, they'd yes sir, no sir. They'd actually put this like polished stuff on your running boards, and it was just exceptional service. So the word got out, because in those days, in the 50s, you go to a car dealer and they hold you upside down and shook you for every dollar you had. Whereas suddenly there's the Volkswagen dealer that's treating you like an actual customer. And I think that was a huge component of the popularity. And then, of course, it was cheap and it was reliable and it got good mileage, and the car itself had a lot of merits too. But I think the sales process was a component of that, and that was sort of the same idea Saturn had when it came out, is to try to treat the customer better than they had normally become accustomed to.
Mm-hmm. What the Saturn didn't have that the Bug did have, though, was longevity.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And it was at the time when those second gen Saturns were not bad little cars, but still GM just, they had lost their mojo by that point.
I agree. The plastic body panels, which everybody thought were the way of the future, they ended up being more expensive to make because they were made in fewer numbers. It took the specialized tooling to make it. I mean, it's the same story as the Chevy Avalanche, right? They made those plastic sides, and the whole thought was, oh, you can go off-roading with this thing, you can scratch up the sides, it's not a big deal, you can just pop that plastic off and replace it. But what ended up happening was replacing that plastic was more expensive than it would have been if you were just fixing scratches on metal.
Yeah. And the other thing about that plastic is, because, metal, if you take it to the middle of the Sahara Desert or drive it north to Alaska, it doesn't expand or contract that much. That plastic, they had really odd panel gaps because they had to accommodate a lot of expansion and retraction in those plastic panels.
Right. I had forgotten about that.
Yeah. If you look at the Japanese cars of the era, one of the big things is how good their panel gaps were, and that was not true of the Saturn. They just because of the material they were using, that it made them look not as well made.
Yeah, you're right. The panel gap is a weird thing that people don't really think about too much, but it is there and it is an issue. You can look at a car and without even realizing what it is that you're honing in on, you can look at it and just go, man, something looks off. It looks cheap. It looks ugly. It looks chintzy. Like, I don't know exactly what I'm looking at, but I don't like the way it looks. And a lot of times that panel gap is what it is.
Yeah, that's a real mark of a good builder, is to get that right. And in those days, when Saturns were new, roaming the earth, the Japanese were just making a huge deal about how tight the fit was on their cars and how good the panels were fitting and all of that as a mark of quality. And here comes Saturn with their plastic panels that had these relatively large gaps, and it just made them look poorly made.
Yeah, it really did. And I do think that the saving grace for the Saturn was the motor. Those 1.9 liter four cylinders were actually very good. They were very tough, and there are a number of them still on the road. Yeah,
you still see people driving those things. That was a good engine.
Mm-hmm.
So
it really is. And actually, it's kind of funny. Over the years, people have realized that those things can actually take quite a bit of power, oddly enough. You can turbocharge them up to 300 horse. And I have talked to a couple of guys that have put 100 wet shot of nitrous through them, and they just keep coming for more. It's pretty bizarre.
That was and it's a chain-driven cam, if I remember right. So you're right, it's a well-built engine that GM actually got right. I think the bean counters might have been on vacation that week, and the engineers were actually let to do the job they're supposed to do.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, don't let the engineers off the leash too much. Otherwise, you end up with the North Star. Fantastic engine, but the starter's underneath the intake manifold.
Well, I bet you that was, again, back to the accounting department where someone said, I remember my dad is the guy who really was instrumental in developing the T3 turbo. And I remember at that time, I went into the lab where he worked, and they're all just aghast at the number of plastic parts inside the engine block of a GM engine. And so I bet you it was somebody trying to save, we'll save 30 cents a car here and we'll make 1 million of these. So 30 cents times 1 million is actually a real piece of change.
And I'm sorry, you're going to have to roll that back a little bit. Did you just say your dad was part of the team developing the T3 turbo?
Yeah. That's why he came over from. He was one of those Germans who came over, put himself through engineering school, and got a job at Air Research at the time, working on helping develop automotive turbochargers.
No kidding.
So, yeah. In fact, right behind me here in my office, I have a cutaway of that turbo that they gave him as a gift when he retired. So it's kind of cool.
That is awesome. What? I had no idea.
Yeah, that's where my love of cars came from. We would turbocharge anything that would run.
Oh man, that is awesome. You're speaking my language now, my friend. I'll turbocharge anything I can get my hands on. I had a big turbo Ford Festiva for a while. It had a Mazda 1.8 swapped in the front, and I ran a T3 Super 60 on that thing.
Oh, cool. Very cool. Yeah, we the last new car I bought while he was still working, or was a new truck, we bought an F-150 so that we could, do truck stuff with it, but specifically choosing the inline six because it's easier to turbocharge. And then he retired early, and that one, so I was stuck with that 150 horse full size pickup for years.
Hey, is there a little bit of a resurgence happening with those straight sixes?
I've seen that there is a few people intending to bring them out. So, it makes a lot of sense when you look at from a standpoint of simplicity. There's, one less head because you have one head on the whole engine. There are fewer parts. It's inherently balanced, so no balance shafts, and it makes sense. I think BMW was right all along.
I think so too. I think where Ford really missed the mark was not bringing their Barra 4-liter straight six over here. I think that would have been a huge hit. I think it would have went well in their pickups. I think it would have went well in their cars. I feel like a Mustang with that 4-liter straight six in it would have just been an absolute screamer.
And that would have been neat, or the Ranger, either of those.
Yes, exactly. And you want to talk about putting down some horsepower? Those literally give the Toyota 2JZ a run for their money. They're both 1,000 horsepower stock block engines.
That's just amazing when you think of with that displacement being able to get that much power out of it.
Oh, I know. It's ridiculous. But like you said, the inherent properties of an inline engine just kind of give it that natural advantage. It doesn't have the harmonics issues that a V8 will or something. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's naturally balanced just the way it runs. So it's a good engine.
Do you have any thoughts about Ford and now Chevy doing a little bit of the flat plane crank stuff in their production vehicles?
Not particularly.
I have to send you. I'll try to find a good video of the Ford Mustang. I think it's the GT350 that has the flat plane 5.2 liter Coyote motor, and they have the most bizarre sound. I think you're going to really get a kick out of it. And but again, that seems like something that's a little bit old school race car tech, and they're starting to bring it into production. And I always kind of appreciate seeing that.
Well, is it Nissan that's got that odd new, was it Mazda or Nissan that has that engine that they're coming out with where it's a variable? Oh, there's probably people out there going, "Hey, dummy, it's this," but where they can. Oh shoot, I'm. It's not even worth saying. I can picture it in my mind, and my mouth is going, "I ain't saying it. Sorry."
Well, so Mazda has the Skyactiv X, which I believe is a Miller cycle engine. So there's a little bit of like a variable compression, but it's through the small roots supercharger that they have on it. And then Nissan is putting into production a variable compression piston where there's almost like a cam on the bottom.
Right, that's what I was thinking of, is that thing.
Yeah.
That should be interesting.
I don't know, man. That's a lot of moving parts to go wrong.
Yeah. And sometimes this is sad to... I was just at a big auto show, not new cars, but, classics and customs and such. And there was enough rumbling in the ground about customs being electric motor cars. There's a lot of people who just said what and swore like a sailor, but I think you're going to start to see that now. So is electrification coming? I think it is.
Who is that manufacturer? There's a manufacturer out there that's making these aftermarket electric motor conversions for hot rods and classic cars. I'm trying to remember what the name is. Man, it's the same company. Okay, let's see here. I'm getting myself confused because there's a company that has an electric motor add-on, which is sort of like an electric supercharger for your engine. It connects to the crank. But then there's another company that's doing an actual electric motor conversion kit where it comes with like a 40 horse electric motor and all of your associated speed control and stuff like that. I don't remember what the name of the company is.
EV West?
It might be. Do
they make, like, you can do late gen MR2s and VW Beetles and Carmen Gutlasses and all of that stuff they have kits for.
Did you say Carmen Gutless?
I did. Oh, the letters or the emails.
That's so funny. You know what, Tony? We've gotten totally sidetracked. Let's get back around to your show. You started Curbside TV as a car show calendar, right?
Well, even further back, I used to work at a little local newspaper, and I realized that you could get new press vehicles and write a story about them, and they would they'd publish it. And I'm like, wow, this is the greatest gig in the world because I get a new car every week and write a story about it. So then, as a adjunct to that, I put them online. And so then I realized, well, if I can sell it to one newspaper, why not sell it to more? And it got to where it was all over the US at one point, these new car reviews. And from there was a local chamber of commerce that said, well, you know about cars. Why don't you put on a car show? And I thought, well, that's going to be easy. And by then there was actually the internet and all. And I went online looking for a car show calendar, and I looked and couldn't find one. I said, well, there's something people need. Our car guys need to be able to find these shows. And that's where Curbside was born. And that was 20 years ago. Can you believe that?
Man, that is
was
crazy.
The 90s, dude. And so Curbside's been through a lot of changes and iterations and all that, but here we are today. And then Jim Cherry and I would both contribute to theexaminer.com, and I kept trying to hire him away, but that was a good gig for him. Well, finally that kind of went downhill, and then that's when Jim joined Curbside. So that's how I was able to attract the talent of Jim Cherry as a writer.
That is so cool.
There's the history of it all.
Wow. That is super fascinating. And then now you just do people have to submit car shows to be added to your list, or is there kind of like a public forum where they can just add them on?
It's all manner of things. I'm always hunting for car shows. There's a lot of shows that happen annually, so I'm able to just keep those online. People find them and submit them. There's a submit a car show form on the site. So any way I can find them. There are some organizations and museums that I work with to regularly post their shows and such. And so that's how they get there. And it's always free. There's no charge to put a show. And I just want there to be a good resource for people like me who love going to car shows. I could spend every day at a car show looking at all the cool cars. So,
boy, I agree with that, my friend. Yes. As a matter of fact, we've got a museum here. It's called Whirl of Speed. And I think I've shown you photos, have I not?
Yeah, and I've heard you talk about it on the podcast too. And that's somewhere I need to get up to.
Man, you are going to love it, let me tell you. They are always looking for volunteers. I'm I'm a long ways away from them. It's about an hour drive up there, but I keep just thinking to myself, man, how do I get the time to be able to go up there and volunteer? Not that they take me as a volunteer, but I mean, man, I'm not trying to brag or anything, but like I could run the tours around that place. Like,
yeah, there's a museum. I used to live in LA until I moved up. I live in Northern California now, but before I moved, I was a docent at the Automobile Driving Museum, which is in El Segundo. One of the coolest museums because on Sundays they take some of the cars out of the collection and drive people around in them, which is just super cool.
That is so cool, yes.
It was fun being a docent there, but I always said I got that title because I doesn't know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, man. We had talked about, as a matter of fact, I think my wife was going to get me tickets to it. There's a living museum that's about 2 hours from where I am, and it's all manner of motorsport. So, I mean, they got airplanes, they got cars, they got motorcycles, but it's a living museum, so everything gets fired up and driven once in a while. And they have these Model T driving classes, and I've always wanted to do it. I need to find like the right time. She was about to buy me tickets right around my birthday, but now it looks like I might be flying to Chicago for the National Restaurant Association conference, for my other show, Pardon My Fork, available at boostboostbbq.com/pardonmyfork. But, I have to do it one of these days.
Yeah. Have you ridden in a Model T?
I have never been in a Model T. I've been around them, but I've never had one run or been in it or anything.
It is the oddest experience because you're way the heck up in the air in this spindly thing, and it almost feels, I don't know, it's weird. And I've seen the videos, and at the Automobile Driving Museum, they have a Model T there with the instructions on how to drive it, and it's so different than any other car, and I've wanted to do that too, basically, is the long way of saying that I'd like to drive one of those too, because it's so different, that car.
It really is. And I've had a few of my friends, because I try to get like a group of us to go up, because they'll do this group deal where you can kind of make like a day of it, right? You can have it catered, and you hang out, and there's drinks, and it can be this whole thing, but you need like 6 people to show up. I can't get any of my friends to do it because they're just like, meh, driving a Model T, who cares?
I'd love to go.
I know, right?
So drag my travel trailer up your way and learn to drive a Model T.
I'll tell you, buddy, I am ready when you are. As a matter of fact, I was recording my call-in show earlier today, and a friend of mine called in who's a huge car guy, but he's also a cinematographer here in Portland, and he's going to be working on a movie in Washington later on this summer. It's a period piece, 1930s period piece, but they need help with like the cars and stuff. And he was actually asking me, he was like, dude, is there any way like you can educate yourself on the 1930s cars and make sure that we're not getting cars from like the 1940s? We want it to be as authentic as possible. And I was actually going to drop your name, but I didn't know, if you had any association with anything from the 30s.
Just through museums and such.
Sure.
So, and it depends, those cars, there were so many, it's amazing how many brands there were in those days. And the class difference from one to the next, because that was such an extreme time of rich and poor in this country. And so, it would probably, like if the movie were set to where people were sort of upper class, it'd be such a different collection of cars than your average neighborhood where there are beat up Model Ts and a few Model As.
Boy, that is a good point. I hadn't thought about that, but you're 100% right. I mean, you can't necessarily have a Model T in the same neighborhood as a Duesenberg.
No. And what's odd about those cars like the Duesenbergs and such, people would throw rocks at those cars. So that's why a lot of them are so nice. People would ultimately take them and hide them away. So, because people were so poor, and here's somebody driving by in a car that is worth 10 years of their income, if they even had a job. And so people were angry, and they would be throwing stones at these cars.
Oh my gosh. Maybe that's why there are, pristine conditions left, because people had to park them in the garage and just didn't want to risk it.
Yeah, it's got to be a component of that. And plus, they were such works of art. I think, these custom coach work bodies and such, that people realized how incredible they were and tried to preserve them.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And it's interesting to look at some of those lower end cars of that time too, because you were talking about the Model T and how you sit so high up and it's such a weird thing to drive. And if I'm not mistaken, the Model T can maintain a constant speed without you having to do too much with the pedals. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, I believe the throttle's on the steering wheel, right?
I think so. And I'm almost thinking the reason why that is because not only did Ford obviously want the Model T to be able to go anywhere, but it was almost built more like a tractor. And it was kind of the same thing. Since we were talking about the 2CV at the beginning of the show, I'll roll this back around. The 2CV and the Model T, I do think had that in common. Lots of suspension travel, good off-road, like could be driven across rough terrain, pasture, over the hills, through the ruts. If you needed to cross a ditch, you could with either of those vehicles. I do think that that's something that's kind of quintessentially people's car of that era.
Well, you got to think that there was some quote before, like 1925 or something. No one had gone over 30 miles, or most people had never gone over 30 miles an hour anyway. Like that was like almost unheard of speed, and so there were a lot of places where there just was no road. It was the mud tracks that the wagons had been dragged through before them. Yeah, right. It has to be an off-road vehicle.
Right. You're right. You're 100% right. That's such a weird thing to think about. And like the Volkswagen Bug was built more, obviously it's capable off-road. We can see that by the Bug being raced in like the Baja 1000. Although it's not because the Bug has a bunch of off-road prowess. It's just because it's such a tough and capable design, right? And so,
yeah.
Because if I'm not mistaken, the history of the Bug was more, it was a people's car, but it was more meant to be driven on like the Autobahn, because that was
by World War II, Germany had a full network of highways and all of that. So
right, exactly. And so they were looking for something that was fuel economy, had good fuel economy ish, and was able to carry 5 people in it and stuff like that. Whereas when you have the French countryside or the kind of pasture land of the United States, you needed something that was much more capable off-road. And it's interesting how capable the Model T was off-road.
Yeah, it in some ways it makes no sense because it's these skinny little tires. It's a rear-wheel drive car. You would think it'd get stuck all the time, but apparently not. You see these old films where these cars are going through these ditches and ruts and such, and they're just doing it, without thinking twice. So.
Right, and the articulation of the suspension is keeping all 4 tires on the ground. It's pretty staggering.
Jeep would look at that and be jealous almost.
Yeah, you're right, man. You're right. That is super funny. Well, so we've been talking about a bunch of historical vehicles. You had talked about how, if there's a car show out there, you'll go to it. So what is your proclivity? Like, what do you lean towards if a person said, hey, I have this car show that is specifically for this type of car? What is that type of car for you?
Well, I've been to so many car shows over however many years it's been. If you have something where there's something unusual, I'm thrilled. I appreciate just about any car show. Everything from the lowrider shows to the rat rod shows to vintage stuff, restored cars, resto mods, customs, all of that. But I love going to a car show and seeing something where I hadn't seen one in 10 years or ever, for that matter. For example, oh, what was it? Micro cars, for example. I dig those just because they're so weird. So I love seeing the unusual and odd.
Oh, I'm 100% with you with the micro cars. They are making a real comeback. They're the new collector car. People are starting to collect them. Their values are skyrocketing. I got to tell you, Tony, I don't know how I would have made this work. There really wasn't any way for me to make it work, but I'm still kicking myself. I would have had the opportunity to buy a running, almost driving, but needed some brake work and needed some body work Nash Metropolitan for $1,500 about 3 years ago. And
oh man, when I was a little kid, that was my dream car. Just because, again, it was so odd.
it is. It's such an odd little thing. And, I had nowhere to put it and I didn't have any place to work on it and blah, blah, yada, yada, all the stuff. But I am kicking myself because that thing would probably be worth $5,000 now, even if I hadn't touched it.
Yeah. How many, I don't even want to think about the cars that I've sold or traded or swapped that I would have loved to have had today.
We never do.
I mean, yeah, that collection would be incredible. But, oh well, you can't think about that.
That's right. I'll tell you, though, if I won the lottery, I think one of the first collector cars I would try to run out and get is, do you remember those supercharged Studebakers, like 1963, 64? I think it was their Skylark something.
Oh, or the Avanti, or
the Avanti was
or the Hawk.
The Hawk, Super Hawk, Skyhawk, something like that.
Yeah, the Golden Hawk.
Golden Hawk, yes. And they had that little small block V8 that came from the factory with a supercharger. Those things were unreal at the time. They would run like mid 12s in a time where fast cars were running high 14s.
Yeah, I mean, there was an Avanti that was a world speed record car, and it was a production car.
And the interesting thing about the Avanti, even though it's maybe one of the ugliest cars on the planet, it really was. It was, but it was one of the first cars to direct air underneath of the car. And they were trying to actively overcome some of the lift that would happen at high speed. And that's something that has been implemented in most other vehicles after Studebaker did that, but they were the first.
Yeah, that was one of the last hurrahs of Raymond Loewy and his work with Studebaker. And there was, and you look, there's no apparent grille on the front, and it's an unusual looking car, to be sure. And it's funny, we just on our podcast, on the Curbside podcast, we were just talking about the Avanti because we were talking about the Corvette Stingray, which is the same era, and the Avanti, properly equipped, was faster. So
right, yes, it was. It's such a weird thing to think about because now Corvette, Camaro, even Novas, and Mustangs, they're all ubiquitous with performance. But at the time, the Mustang was supposed to be like the Secretary's version of the Camaro. I mean, it wasn't developed to be that performance minded until someone else at Ford said, hey, wait a minute, we got this small car, it's lightweight, it handles well. Let's throw a big motor in it.
Yeah. Well, all the Mustang was a styling exercise on the Falcon, essentially, although it was absolutely beautiful, and you could get lots of options on it, which was also neat. But in terms of any groundbreaking engineering, there really wasn't any. Well, nothing of significance.
And you know what? You just reminded me. I'd completely forgotten. The Mustang was originally based off of the four-door Falcon, wasn't it?
Yep. Yeah, it was a Falcon. And there's some talk that the reason for the Mustang, the Corvair came out as Ed Cole's inexpensive car, but the way it was designed, it had four-wheel independent suspension, although it was swing arms, but four-wheel independent suspension and all of that. And it never really took off as a cheap car. It took off as a sporty car, and that's where it found its market. And really, the Mustang was kind of an answer to the Corvair, And the Mustang's also what killed the Corvair. So there you go.
I did not know that was the response to the Corvair. That's interesting.
I mean, to some extent, all of a sudden, Chevy found itself with the car that was at the bottom of the range effectively, but not appealing to the low-end market as much as the performance market. Guys were buying them and turning them into fast, fun little cars. And of course, you could get the turbo, or the hot tip is the 4-carb model. That's the one I would get. So
really,
yeah. Yeah, that the 4-carb has more low-end torque, and it's just turbos in those days sucked. Let's be honest. That 4-carb had good torque and was a sporty little car. You drive a 4-carb model, it's fun to drive around.
Interesting. So is that the collector's Corvair then?
I think that the turbos they probably have more collector value, but a 140, which is what the 4-carb models are called, is probably pretty collectible. But Corvairs are so undervalued right now still.
Really?
So I think so. I mean, you can still pick up a nice Corvair for $5,000, and that's one where you take it and drive it and it runs fine, not rusty. I mean, you can there was a Corvair Ramside pickup at Barrett Jackson that went for $70,000, but I think that's just some guy was just a little deep in the wacky tobacco when he made that bid.
Hey, depending on where that auction was, yeah, could happen.
Yeah.
That's super funny, man. Wait, this has been an absolutely enlightening conversation. I cannot thank you enough for calling in. We actually didn't intend on doing a full podcast, but I couldn't help myself. I was very excited to talk to you because I am a regular listener to your show, and I was very excited to speak with you. So thank you very much.
Well, and I listen to your show too, and I love the tie-in with the barbecue and the beer and all those are things that I really enjoy as well. So booze, I can say it. I love your show too. So there you go.
I appreciate that, man. And everybody, you got to go and check out curbside.tv, curbside.tv/podcast is where you can find his show. You have got to go and check it out. The latest episode is about the 63 to 67 Corvette, and it is fascinating to listen to. You have to go and check it out. Highly recommended from 3BQ. It is, you know what? This might be our first 3BQ podcast pick.
Wow. Well, I'm honored. And this coming week, we're going to be talking to Nick Pond from the 24 Hours of Lemons. And then this weekend, I'm going to the 24 Hours of Lemons here at Sonoma Raceway. So,
yeah, heck yeah. That is going to be awesome. I can't wait to hear about that.
Yeah, that's going to be a hoot. So those guys know how to have a good time.
That's fantastic, Tony. Well, hey, my friend, I will let you go because it has gotten late, but thank you again, and I look forward to talking to you again soon.
Likewise, and it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
And there he goes. Great conversation, really off the cuff. I was so happy to be able to talk to him. And I'm not making this up, you guys. I honestly do listen to his show every week. He's got a really killer topic, and his co-host is amazing, and they really do a good job. And so if you like what we're producing here, you are going to like what they're producing over there. They're just these snippets, these little short shows. I shouldn't call them short, but they run about a half hour, and tons of information packed into them. Very interesting stuff. So make sure that you are going and checking them out. One more time, it is curbside.tv. That link is going to be available underneath this episode on boostboozbbq.com. And don't forget to leave us a rating, leave us a review. We will be giving away that t-shirt next week. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thanks for telling a friend. For Tony, this is Andy, and we will see you next time. Boost, Booze, and Barbecue.